Hello, folks. Welcome to another week on World War II TV, and we have war crime shows coming at you later this week. We've got battle shows coming up after my week's vacation, but right now we're doing a part 2, and Bill Warnock returns for a second presentation on the 741st Tank Battalion, and all the links to the pre-orders of his book and his website are in the description below, and it's all through his research into the maps, the archives, and the photos. So I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Bill. How are you today?
Glad to be back, Paul. Yourself?
I'm good. So, well, we're going to just kick straight off with where we left it last time. It was fascinating detail. So I'll bring up your PowerPoint. So, folks. Bill's, I think, going to do a little kind of a reminder of what we talked about last time. But basically, we're going to continue the story. So, over to you, sir.
So here's what we did last time. We were able to cover 2 of the 3 photos here. The June 6th photo of Tank Dozer number 9 on Easy Red, and we covered the middle photo of Panther 318 knocked out in the Twin Villages, a picture taken on December 18th. And that's right about exactly where we ran out of time. And there was just a minute or so left, and I popped up the photo taken on March 9th, which is the picture that's on the cover of my book. That photograph right there, taken in Dümpelfeld, Germany on March 9th. And that is probably the most famous photo of 741st Armor, certainly the most published photo there's been. And I thought about creating a slide that was a sort of a collage of instances where the photo was used in books and so forth. But I thought, rather than doing that, let's look at this. I thought this was more interesting. That photograph has inspired model builders. About 20 years ago, the one on the right side there was, on the left side, was appeared on the cover of a modeling magazine. And there were some other photographs of the diorama. It was done by a German modeler. And more recently this year, I discovered the diorama on the right. And that was done by a guy in Atlanta, Georgia. And I contacted him, telling him I was going to be on the show and could I use some photos of his diorama. I needed some photos. And so he supplied me with these 2. And I didn't realize till I was corresponding with David that diorama was 1/72nd scale. So it's a very small.
Wow.
That thing's only that big or so. Where the other one was 1/35th scale, which would be around twice the size. But I noticed, I was looking at the details. Both guys were trying to replicate the wire mesh on the side of the tank, which was called Summerfield tracking, which was a wire mesh. It was a prefab airfield surface, and they would weld steel bars or cables to the side of the tank and affix the mesh to that, and you could hook foliage into it and so forth. So anyhow, David won a Best Diorama Award earlier this year at a meet down in Atlanta, and that's how I saw the pictures on the internet and popped it up there. So I don't know if he's watching or if he was watching last time, but hopefully he can tune in again.
Yeah.
So anyhow, here's the photo. And it was made by Corporal Louis Nemeth of the 165th SPC. And that day he was working together with Staff Sergeant Rowe, who was the motion picture cameraman. And that's a little picture of Nemeth down there holding his speed graphic. And the name of the tank in the picture was ASP II. And if I click next here on my keyboard, it puts a little red circle around where the name appears on the applique armor on the side of it. And you can see they've taken a cloth or something and wiped away the grime from it so you could read the name a little bit. I forget who I was showing this photo to one time, but they asked, if that's ASP II, where was ASP I? And the answer to that is ASP I was a tank that the 741st had in the States. And the battalion did not take its armor overseas. So ASP, and I doubt it certainly didn't have a Roman numeral next to it, which is probably called ASP. And that one stayed stateside, and the 741st got brand new armor in England. And that's hence the Roman numeral 2. So anyhow, next slide here. This is the caption card at the National Archives for the photograph. And that's, Nemeth would have turned in a handwritten caption sheet with all of his photos. And then this would have been a transcription of what he wrote. And sometimes they make mistakes in the transcriptions, or sometimes the cameraman makes a mistake in his handwritten caption. But in this one, I think he got everything right. He got the name of the town right, minus the umlauts on the U on Dümpelfeld. And the date is correct on it, and the company is correct on it. And he had an interesting note here that I underlined and read, is that at the time this photo was made on March 9th, it was the only tank from Company A that had landed on D-Day that was still in action. And I don't know if it was the only tank in the 741st that was a D-Day veteran that was still in service. There was a couple tanks from Headquarters Company, medium tanks, that landed that day that may have made it this far. And if my memory is correct, companies A and B, the DD tank companies, they also had a couple medium tanks that weren't DDs that came in later in the day on an LCT, and you know, those obviously didn't sink. They made it to the shore, so maybe one of those survived this long. So hard to say whether it was the only one D-Day veteran from the battalion that was still in service on March 9th, but it was definitely the only one from Company A. Yeah, go ahead.
But you said still in service, because I think the assumption would be that if they've all been knocked out. But one of the things when we've done shows about tank repair is that, you know, the distances these vehicles are crossing, engines wear out. I mean, in some cases, it would have just be simply that the tankers just died of natural causes.
Yeah, it could be. The statement there is a little ambiguous, so you don't know if there were some others that were under long-term repair or were salvageable, but a lot were knocked out or just, you know, failed for the reason you said. But anyhow, I thought that was an interesting comment in there, and I know a lot of people who've published a photo have picked up on that comment there and included it in their photo captions. So anyhow, aside from taking a picture of the tank crossing the Treadway Bridge that day, Nemeth also took this picture of engineers from the 990th Engineer Treadway Bridge Company building the bridge. And you can see a couple German, or 3 German women crossing over one of the Treadway sections. And if you look carefully at the photo, on the section of Treadway that those women are walking on, part of the bridge is still intact underneath them. So the demolition charge that the Germans set off to destroy the bridge, it took out about 2/3 to 75% of the bridge and left that little strip along the north side of the bridge there. So in the background, you can see the engineers, they're deucing half of that special hydraulic crane for the treadway sections there. This photo is at the National Archives, and I haven't seen this one published too many times. This is also at the National Archives. This is 2 minutes of Robert Rowe's film from that day. And the film, when it starts out, you can see 2 bridges in the shot. The one in the foreground is what the main street in Dümpelfeld passes over. The Hauptstrasse goes over this bridge, and it's completely demolished. And the one in the background is the bridge in question here. And apparently the engineers thought that one was easier to put back in service with treadway bridge sections. And so that's the one they're working on the photo. So anyhow, I'll start the film here. There's a better shot of that hydraulic crane that was on that deuce and a half.
Very high water table at that point as well, by the look of it.
Yeah. The reference number down at the bottom, 1180C 3578, that's the NARA reference number. You can actually go on their website, and using that reference number, you can find the full film and download it. There's more to it than the 2 minutes I showed here, but it's other stuff other than this bridge.
And are they using treadway because it's easier in that particular location than Bailey bridges? I mean, you see the Bailey bridges more frequently. It
was such a short little space they had to bridge that treadway was probably the best solution. That's the truck that had the hydraulic cranes on it. That Jeep has some writing on the windshield, and it's painted white with writing below it, and I could never read that. Unfortunately, the film in this section is a little bit jittery. And then the last shot here is the tank crossing the bridge.
And we've had 3 people have asked, why on earth would a tank still have a Rhino hedgerow cutter in March 45?
But they did a lot of them all the way up through VE Day. They just never took them off. So that's the film.
Brilliant stuff.
So that film and the still photo and that motion picture film was shot on March 9th. We need to backtrack to March 7th, to a little setup to that, what happened that day on March 9th. On the 7th of March, Company A of the 741st, I think it was in the morning, they captured Eickerscheid. And during the battle, or the fight for Eickerscheid, the company commander, Ed Sledge, was wounded. He got hit in the hand. So he was evacuated and ended up in a hospital near Paris. In his place, as company commander, they moved up the lieutenant who was leading 1st Platoon, Roger McDonough. So he went out, became company commander, and they didn't have another officer to substitute for McDonough at 1st Platoon. So Sergeant Mayne Youngblood took over the platoon. And after he took over the platoon, they headed out towards Schonau with Youngblood's tank leading the way. And I put in below that 740 Company A guide on, I put the names of all the crew members there. There was no bow gunner aboard the tank that day. There was just the 4 other crewmen. And of the 4 guys, Youngblood was the only one who was a D-Day veteran. Meads, Peake, and Straza were all replacements in July or August. And again, Youngblood was leading the way. And just outside of Schonau, they got hit with anti-tank fire and the tank was knocked out. And the hit penetrated the armor and it killed Ernest Meads, who was the driver. There's a little picture of him there. And Youngblood ended up receiving the Bronze Star for saving the lives of Peake and Straza. Peake wasn't that badly hurt, but Straza was seriously injured and ended up losing a leg. So after that tank was knocked out, Youngblood, I forget what he told me, but he had to wait around for quite a few hours to get a replacement tank. And that replacement tank was ASP II. And it came with a whole new crew. Straza was in bad shape in the hospital. His war was done. Meads was dead and Peake was hurt. And he was, I don't remember whether he was evacuated or not, but Youngblood had to start all over with a new crew. So here's the crew of ASP II. And you can see on the far left side is Art Najera, or Youngblood always used to call him Najera. He was born in Mexico, so I'm guessing that's not the right pronunciation of last name, maybe Najera or something like that. But and then you can see Youngblood in the just to the immediate right of Najera, and Steve Hoffer's got his head poking out there, and Charlie Freeman. You can just see his wireframe glasses in the bow gunner's position there. And the driver was John Onashuk. Now, of all these guys here, you know, Hoffer died in '69 and Freeman died in '76, so I never had a chance to meet any of them. But I did know Youngblood, and I did talk to John Onashuk, who John was an interesting guy. I think he was from Pennsylvania, and I knew he was born in the States before I interviewed him. And when he picked up the phone, he had an Eastern European accent. And I was a little puzzled by that. And I said, John, you were born in the States. Where's the accent come from? He said, well, when I was very young, my family moved back to the old country. And so he grew up in, I think it was Slovakia. And as a young man, he came back to the States because he had U.S. citizenship. And it was there, you know, he ended up in the U.S. Army and he spent the rest of his life in the States in Pennsylvania. So, and of all these crewmen, he's the one who lived the longest. I never knew Art. He was certainly alive during the time when I was researching all of this. I don't know why I never contacted him, but I never did. I guess I got enough from Onashuk and Youngblood. Youngblood had a very good memory for all kinds of detail. There's a setup story to this photo that he talked about where they took a German prisoner and all the whole episode around that prisoner and what happened that day. They were scrounging for food. And Youngblood was a big guy, and he put his boot up against the door to kick it open, and the door burst open, and there was a table on the other side of the door, and there was a German sitting there with a machine pistol pointing right at the doorway, right at his chest. And he said the guy put the machine pistol down and put his hands up, and they took him along, and they went out scrounging for food. They were looking for eggs, so they took this guy with them. And there's a whole story about him, and when they eventually had to turn him over to the MPs, and they moved on toward Dümpelfeld. But he had a great memory for detail, and he told me about when the photographers came to get them to ask him to drive over that bridge for the camera. So anyhow, he was my primary source for the story.
There's a lot of uniform details in there for the nerds, aren't there? I mean, I don't think any one of them are wearing the same headgear as anyone else. Is it Najero? Is that a liner for an M43 jacket he's got on? I think possibly.
That's what he's wearing, and he's got an M1 helmet with a net on it. And interesting you mentioned about the headgear there. I mean, a couple of the guys, Freeman and Hoffer, are both wearing the M38 tank helmets, but Youngblood and Anashok are wearing something a little bit unusual. That helmet is a French manufacturer.
I was saying, it looks like the French one, yeah.
Is, and we'll get into that in the next slide. But anyhow, when I was talking about the tank that got knocked out on the 7th, Youngblood was the only D-Day veteran in that crew. And this crew, all of these guys were D-Day veterans. So it was a D-Day veteran tank with a D-Day veteran crew. So here's the helmet. And I think when we were talking last time, I can't remember whether it was during the show or before the show, about this new book on tank helmets that recently came out. If you're into U.S. tank helmets or interested in that subject, that's the book for you. Two of the authors, Larry and Paul, I know, and the helmet pictured there is from Paul's collection. He lives in the Netherlands. And what it is, it's a French radio operator's helmet. It's not a French tanker helmet. And what happened in the autumn of '44 was, due to supply shortages, First Army contracted with the factory in Paris that made those helmets in 1940 and prior. And maybe they had spare parts around, they could readily assemble helmets, or they had the ability to fabricate some new ones. So they, under a contract from First Army, they made helmets for tank crews. And you see these in all kinds of different armored units within First Army. There's famous pictures of the Panther that was knocked out by the Cologne Cathedral by the Pershing crew. There's one of the guys in the photo, one or two of them are wearing these helmets. So you see them around in other First Army armored units. Now, the one in the photo is in the brown color of the French Army. There are two of these in existence that came from U.S. Army veterans, one from a 3rd Armored vet, and one is in the possession of the family of a 741st Tank Battalion vet. And both of those are painted OD green. And in fact, the one that is in the possession of the 741st family, it was painted OD green. During the Bulge, it was painted white. And I have a picture of the guy wearing it during the Bulge, painted white. And then after the Bulge, it was repainted OD green. So there's at least 3 layers of paint on that. And maybe that brown is on the bottom of it. But so there's some controversy as to whether any U.S. tank crews were issued these helmets in the brown color, the French Army brown. Paul made an argument that they were. I mean, he could be right. I don't really know. But for sure, the two that have veteran provenance are painted OD green. And these are ultra rare helmets. When I told the family of that 741st vet what that helmet was worth, it was one of those Antiques Roadshow moments where they were shocked to know that it was worth anything, let alone what it is, especially with only 2 of them known in existence. To U.S. Army. Wow. So if you have
living up to your reputation from the first show of going that extra mile with the geeky details, Bill.
So there's pictures that's of a 741st crew in the upper right-hand corner. And one of the guys in that photo, this is in Czechoslovakia at the end of the war, he's wearing one of these helmets. So anyhow, this is a picture of ASP II that was taken in Czechoslovakia at the end of the war. And it was, you can almost read the registration number in this photo. You can read most of the digits. I have another photo that's in my book where you can read the entire registration number, and it is 303-6841. And thanks to Joe DeMarco of the Sherman Minutia website, he helped me out with understanding when that was produced, and it was accepted by the War Department in May of 43, and it was built by the Press Steel Car Company in Chicago. And I noticed there was some casting markings on the turret, and Joe helped me out understand what that was. The number at the top, D50878, was apparently a part number. It also says PSF, which would have been the Pittsburgh Steel Foundry. And it's dated February of 43, and there's a number below, which maybe is a serial number. I can't remember what Joe told me about that. But he did tell me that the Pittsburgh Steel Foundry didn't make many turrets for Sherman, so it's fairly rare to find one. And he also pointed out a detail that I circled in red on the rear there. He said, you can still see in this picture adapter mounts for the deep water fording kits from D-Day. They haven't removed these metal brackets, and you can just barely see them sticking out on the back of the tank. So that was a detail I hadn't caught. Thanks to Joe for pointing that out.
So just the brackets, not the power takeoff from the drive.
Just metal brackets sticking out from the back of it. Adapter mounts, he called them, for the deep water fording kit. For that, those particular ones are for the exhaust stack.
Right. Okay.
So I would have never known that if he hadn't pointed that out in the photograph. But now in this photograph, you can see on the turret hanging over on the back of the turret, there's a tarp hanging there. The other photograph I have of this tank taken in Pilsen, where you can more clearly read the registration number. You can see on the back of the turret bustle, there's a large number 12 painted in white on the back of the turret bustle. And I think those large numbers hand painted on the back, they're not related to D-Day. They're related to the battle on Hill 192, or the assault that took place on July 11th. I think the numbers were related to assault lanes that were used that day. We'll see an example of this later on in another picture, but anyhow, that detail is covered up in this photo. So wow. There's 3 known photos of this tank. There's this one, the one that's in my book, and then of course the famous photo taken on March 9th. So in 1996, I decided to try to find out where this photo was taken. So I drove over to Dümpelfeld, and I had the picture that you can see in the lower right-hand corner. That was also taken by Louis Nemeth that day. And, you know, this was back before Google Earth or, you know, any way to easily figure out where things were located. I just had a road map. But from the road sign to the photo, it wasn't hard, even with my limited means, to figure out where the picture was taken. So I drove right to the spot there, and of course the sign's gone, but there's another one in nearly the same spot. So I found the picture there with that soldier from Company F of the 9th Infantry looking at it. Incidentally, he's in that other picture earlier, that sort of top view looking down in the treadway section. You can see him standing there talking to a captain, which may have been the CO of Company F, but he's definitely an infantryman and not an engineer. So anyhow, so I'm standing there looking at the spot where that photo was taken, and I turn around, and behind me, I can see that the church and one of the buildings that's in the photo of the tank crossing the bridge. And I put a little inset there to show you the part of the photo that I was able to see from that spot. But it wasn't an exact match. I was trying to get the right angle and approach the bridge from the right way, and even just to figure out where it was, because I didn't know. So I'm cutting through backyards and so forth. I'm surprised somebody didn't call the Polizei on me, because there's this strange guy walking through backyards carrying a camera. But anyhow, I made it down to this little creek in the photo that's called Adenauer Bach. And when I was there, I put a little circle here. I put a little red circle there. That's where the bridge is located. And when I got down to the creek, there was some fencing there. It was hard. I couldn't get right up close to it, but I was able to take this picture. And what surprised me when I hung out there to take the photo is that the Treadway Bridge was still there. And I couldn't get closer. I don't remember why I left that day, but I wasn't able to get any closer than that in 1996. But anyhow, I went back in 15 years later in 2011. And this time I figured out how to get to the bridge and how to get down into the creek. And I took that photograph. It was a little more overgrown at that time, but the treadway section was still there.
Wow.
And here's a picture I took underneath the bridge. And you can see on the right side a lot of the destruction from the demolition charge that took out the southern half, or about 2/3 of the bridge. The rest of it is still pretty much intact. And you can see in the photograph, there's a big glob of concrete sticking on the bridge there. I don't know if that was put there to help reinforce it, or from the repair work when they permanently repaired the bridge up above. But down in the creek, there were pieces of that brick that had been worn down by water over, 70 years or so at that time. And I bent down and picked one of them up, and it's a doorstop in my house today there. I had it sitting here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sitting there.
Cool.
But anyhow, there was a lot of really water-worn debris from that bridge down in the creek there, and I grabbed one of them. But if you looked up, here's a sort of a comparison shot of you can see the church and that building that's in the middle ground of the photograph there. The building's had an addition put on it, so it's a little bit changed since the war, but the church was certainly recognizable. Would have been easier to see if it was autumn and there was no leaves on the trees in the background. But anyhow, here's the treadway section. And for this presentation, I was putting together this slide, and I thought, well, maybe we'll have an inset showing the 1945 photo compared to the way it looks today. And I put that in there to make the comparison, and I got to looking at those. It looks like the end of pins coming through the bridge there. In the color photo, they're kind of tapered on the end. And I got to looking at the photograph, and the ones in the wartime photograph, they're not tapered on the end. And in fact, they have holes drilled through them with D-rings through them. So I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is going on here? And that's not the same as in the photograph. And so I dug out the technical manual for a treadway bridge, and I figured out what that thing is there. They're treadway connecting pins. And one end of it is tapered, and the other end is straight with the D-ring on it. And the tapered end is always towards the inside of the bridge, and the D-rings are always on the outside. So when I saw that, I realized what probably happened was after the war, when the Germans permanently repaired that bridge, they removed the southernmost treadway section, the one that you can see most easily in the wartime photograph. They removed it for whatever reason, maybe it was damaged or whatever. And then they took the northernmost one and slid it over into that spot. And that's how the connecting pin ended up on the outside. And if you look carefully in that photo, you can see underneath the bridge, they must have put wood under there as a concrete form, and they poured concrete into there to repair the bridge. And I bet if you walk under that bridge, you'll only see one treadway section, the one on the outside. The other one is completely gone. So I didn't realize all this till, again, I was putting together this slide earlier this month. So anyhow.
That's really good detail. And the pins are similar to the ones on Bailey bridges. So they obviously must have borrowed the technique.
Yeah. Yep. Right next to the bridge, there's a gas house there. And it has the same name as it did during the war, except during the war it was called a Gasthof. And if you can see on the right side of that photograph, you can see there's two umbrellas in the outdoor patio area there. Just past those, a few meters behind them, is where the bridge is. You can just see the railings on the bridge there a little bit. And I went into that gas house, and I had lunch in there, and I met Anya. She and her husband Klaus own the gas house, and I took that picture there. Anya's the one in black in the photograph, and that's her daughter, the little girl holding the picture of ASP I crossing the bridge. They had seen the photograph before. But I had my laptop there with the motion picture film on it, and I think it was the first time they'd ever seen the motion picture film of that. So the older girl in the photo, I think, was the babysitter. And there was an older woman there too, who I talked to along with Anya, and tried to understand a little bit of the history of the bridge. They didn't really know when it was built, but they told me that it had been a railroad bridge. And I made a note of that, and I didn't think much of it until I got home and was looking at the photograph, and there's no railroad tracks anywhere in those photographs from March of 45. So if there had been tracks there, they had been removed at some point before March of 45, maybe even before the war. So exactly when the bridge was built and the whole history behind it. It was just a rabbit hole I didn't go down into. It didn't have a whole lot of bearing on what I was writing in the book, but it's a research.
It's the kind of rabbit hole that makes for good World War II TV viewing, because you're amongst friends and fans who will just think that kind of work is amazing, which it is.
I just had to let it go, but anyhow, I've been down enough rabbit holes, so that one I let go. But anyhow, if there had been a railroad tracks over, it would have taken it right past that gas house, right where that addition is, on the side of the gas house that was built after the war. It would have been very close to that. But anyhow, I had lunch in there, and it was very good food. And today, that gas house, they have a website that's under construction. That's the address is down in the lower right-hand corner. They also have a Facebook page, and that's apparently what's active. That's where the menu is, and all the photos, including this picture, is on their Facebook page. And this photo shows the north side of the bridge that was still intact when the bridge was blown in 45. And you can see they've put some new surface on top of the bridge. That wasn't there when I was there. And there's kind of a trellis work over the top of the bridge, so you can have your lunch or dinner on the bridge if you want. So it was very good food. I recommend the place. And if I ever get back there, I'll stop by again. But
well, some of the people in the sidebar who don't live too far away, I think they'll be going there and matching up the photo and having a German beer and a meal or two. Great stuff.
Yeah, it's maybe about driving mile or distance. It's maybe about 40 kilometers from Remagen. So it's heading in that direction. So anyhow, another photo is this one here. Iconic image from the Liberation Parade on August 29th. And the cameraman who took that photograph, Fred Poinsett, also took this lesser known photo in the same parade of tanks from the 741st that followed behind the 110th Infantry. In fact, all three regiments of the 28th Division were in the parade. I can't remember exactly where the 741st fit in the mix there, but the whole battalion was on parade there. And Fred took this still photo, which isn't quite as famous as the previous one. It's it's certainly not as well composed as the previous one, so not as well known. But the original negative to that photo is what I scanned to make this image that you're seeing here. And I put a little picture of the original negative there. That's at Nara. And, you have to use latex gloves when you're handling original negative.
Yep.
But it's amazing to think when you're holding that little 4x5 piece of nitrate film, that thing was there that day in Paris when the image was made. So, and aside from what some of the still photos that Fred took, and there was photographers from various news agencies there as well. There was a lot of pictures, but there was also motion picture cameramen there from the 165th. And I didn't put any of the motion picture film in here, but there's 5 examples of it that's at NAR that you can download from their website. And the one in the picture is the still that I put up there from 2235 shows 4 tanks from the battalion. The one second from the right, there you can just barely see it, as the battalion colors are there. They're not fully unfurled, but the guy in the tank commander's position is holding the battalion colors there. And a note about the 28th Division and the 741st. The 741st was, with the 16th Infantry on D-Day, but the day after that, or maybe it was 2 days, I can't remember, they were attached to the 2nd Infantry Division, and they remained with the 2nd Division all the way through the Normandy campaign. But after Normandy, the 2nd Division left 5th Corps and joined 8th Corps and headed out to the Brittany Peninsula to battle the Germans there, particularly at the port city of Brest. The 741st did not go with them. They stayed with 5th Corps and were attached to the 28th Division. And they were with the 28th Division from the dates shown there on this slide, August 27th through October 3rd. So here's a couple more still shots from the motion picture film. The picture of the guy on the left, that's Colonel Skaggs, the commander of the 741st. And the comparison photo in the middle, I didn't have another shot of him from quite that same angle, but That's a picture of him made when right after he received the DSC. You can see it pinned to his shirt there. The DSC was awarded for his actions on Omaha Beach. But that's a picture of him. It's a very short, a couple seconds of him in Paris. And at the very last minute, he turned around and turned toward the camera and smiled. And I stopped, did the freeze frame there and grabbed that shot to put in here. The other thing
is that the same turret numbers that you said that you think were introduced for Hill 192?
Yeah, and you can see him painted in white on the back of the turret bustle. I don't think those were the same as the tactical numbers on the tank, which you can't really read in this photo. It's not clear enough. In other words, that tank on the right there that has the 13, I don't think the tactical number was A13. The 13 relates to an assault lane on Hill 192. There's another picture of a photo of a tank in the parade with the number 4S on it, which I think would have been lane number 4, and that was the support tank for assault lane number 4. But then I saw another picture in this parade of a tank with the number 30 painted on the back, and that darn sure isn't a tactical number, and I don't think they had 30 assault lanes. I know they didn't that day, so I'm not quite certain exactly the scheme that was used here for these numbers, but ASP II had number 12 on it, and I looked through all this motion picture film trying to find it, and there's no number 12 in any of the film that I could find. So anyhow, so enough of the Paris parade. This kind of is a segue into where we'll go next here. After the parade, the 28th Division and the 741st, I think they maybe spent that evening on the outskirts of Paris. And the next morning, it was back into action, pursuing the Germans across northern France and Belgium and Luxembourg and into Germany. And by September 13th, the 110th Infantry had reached Gross-Kampenberg. And this is a picture I took 3 years ago. And if you, the road in the photograph, if you follow that further in the direction that I'm facing here, when I took the photo, you come to the church in the middle of town. And that photograph there was taken on September 13th, right near the church on the same road there. By the name of the cameraman, I don't know. It's just identified to Detachment O, or Ohio, was what's actually written in the caption of the 165th. The name of the cameraman is identified. There were like 7 guys with that detachment, so I don't know which one took the photo, but Detachment O spent a lot of time with the 28th Division. So, and this was on the 13th, and the 740 Company C moved into the area shortly thereafter on the 14th. And so the next few slides are going to be about Joe Dew. We talked about him last time.
We did, yep.
Battle of the Twin Villages. This is his DSC action on September 14th. And Joe was not a D-Day veteran. He joined the 1st Platoon of Company C on August 14th as a replacement officer. He and Lieutenant Vic Miller. Miller took the 3rd Platoon, and Miller was killed during the Bulge. But both of them joined on August 14th. And between August 14th and September 14th, they didn't see much action. So September 14th was really Joe's first day of combat, and he received the DSC for actions on his very first day in combat. So in the center is a page from the award proposal that was put forward to recommend him for the DSC. It's about 12 pages, and I picked that one out because it had his company commander's signature on it, Captain Young. And you can't really read it because I've reproduced it so small here, but it says the action took place on September 15th near Heckerscheid, which when I first read that, I had to go back and review all my research. Did I make a mistake? Because I have this action as being the 14th outside of Gross-Kampenberg, and I realized that Captain Young had just made a mistake in the documentation there and put September 15th near Heckerscheid, because on September 15th, Joe Dew and Company C was outside of Heckerscheid. He just got the 2 dates confused. Company C was only in the Gross-Kampenberg area that one day on the 14th. And there's a picture on the right of Joe Dew receiving the DSC from General Robertson, CG of the 2nd Infantry Division. And standing beside him is Colonel Skaggs there. It looks like he's wearing the same helmet that he had in that Paris photograph, except he's wearing a 41 field jacket in this photo, where he was wearing a tanker jacket. in the other picture. And Skaggs was not in that photo just to, accompany his lieutenant there to receive the DSC. Skaggs received the Silver Star for his part in the battle for the Twin Villages. There was a whole lineup of guys there that were receiving medals. Joe's was the highest awarded that day, so he went first. He was on the far right of the row. And then there was even a second row behind that. The general was doling out a lot of medals that day. So that photo was taken at Wallerscheid, Germany by Leander Zwick of the 165th SPC. So this is his DSC citation, and I left the wrong date in there, September 15th. The actual citation doesn't mention the name of the town. They deleted that from the citation. But if they'd have put it in there, it would have been wrong if they'd have put Heckerscheid in there. But anyhow, essentially what it's saying here is that on the morning of September 14th, there was an attempt to push further east from Gross-Kompenberg and take some high ground near the next town called Kessfeld. And Joe Dew and the Company C, their role was to move their tanks up close to the Dragon's Teeth. And at that point, they were to provide cover fire so the infantry could come forward with demolition teams and blow gaps through the Dragon's Teeth. But it says here there was, too much small arms and mortar and artillery fire that the engineers weren't able to make it forward, which is partly true. It's a more complicated story than that, but bottom line was there was no demolition charges that were used to blow holes through the Dragon's Teeth. So the tanks weren't able to get past the Dragon's Teeth. Everyone was stuck at the Dragon's Teeth. So Joe Dew got outside of his tank, and they're under fire, small arms and mortar fire, and probably artillery as well. And he climbs up onto the frontal armor of the tank. And, they're maybe, I don't know, 10 meters away from the Dragon's Teeth. And at that range, the gun sights on the main gun don't work when you're that close. So he had to get outside and climb up on the frontal armor and manually align the gun tube with each of the Dragon Teeth. And his gunner, Albert Wallace, used AP shells to demolish the Dragon's Teeth one by one. And how he survived doing that, I don't know, out there in all that fire. And of course, I imagine he didn't stay on the frontal armor when they fired the main gun. You wouldn't have wanted to been right next to it when you did that. So they probably had to go around the side or around back of the tank and come back around and realign the gun tube and fire again. But they did manage to blast the path just narrow enough for one tank to get through, or for a tank to get through. So he made it through, and the rest of his platoon made it through. He had 4 tanks in his platoon that day and made it into the field. And on his own, without any infantry support, took out a couple anti-tank guns and kept some of the concrete bunkers buttoned up enough that the infantry was able to push past the Dragon's Teeth. And by, into the afternoon or evening, I forget which, they were on their objective, but they would have never been able to do that if he hadn't have thought of taking out the Dragon's Teeth in that way. I've never heard of anybody else doing something like that.
No, absolutely amazing. But ignoring his incredible bravery in that situation, which is clearly above and beyond, hence the Distinguished Service Cross, that action, though, would you describe that as a typical 741st Independent Tank Battalion action? Because there's discussions in the sidebar about the 75mm gun, the 76mm gun, and the discussions being that in the infantry support role, you're not really meant to be coming up against armor. That job of escorting and protecting infantry and covering engineers, I would imagine, would be kind of the bread and butter work for that unit. Is that more or less it?
That's absolutely true. That's primarily what they did. And when they did run into armor, it was usually Stugs. It was very rare to engage other armor. I mean, the battle for the Twin Villages is a large exception.
Example, yeah. But
primarily they did not. Primarily they were doing, infantry support role like this. So so when I was trying to figure out where all this took place and add more to the story, besides what's in the citation, I found this map overlay at the National Archives in the Combat Interview Collection, and it showed the attack of 2nd Battalion 110th on the 14th of September. And down at the bottom, you can see there's a note that says, right platoon tanks made penetration approximately here. that little circle, and I colored it in red, so it stands out a little bit better. But I also zoomed in on it a little more for this particular slide here. And again, you can see where they were locating the approximate area where Joe Dew and his crew made that penetration of the dragon's teeth. And I put a little red X there because that's actually where the penetration was, is where the little red X is. But so Lieutenant Dew was supporting, with his first platoon, was supporting Company E of the 110th, and Lieutenant Miller of 3rd Platoon was supporting Company G. And their objective that you can see there is the high ground just outside of Kessfeld. And Lieutenant Herb Covington had 2nd Platoon, and he was in reserve. And after Dew penetrated the dragon's teeth and got his 4 tanks through, Covington's platoon also went through that same gap to get out with the infantry there. And I think they lost a tank out there, and there was a crewman killed, and there were some guys wounded who Dew helped escort them back to the dragon's teeth. The injured crewman, he was providing cover for them, so they didn't have to cross the open ground fully exposed to enemy fire. I put a list there of everybody who was in Joe Dew's crew at that point. Albert Wallace was his gunner, and he died long before I started my research, but he made the Army a career and retired as a command sergeant major. The driver was Woodrow Holsey, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. But so those are the 4 members of the crew aside for Dew. And I put in red some markings of some of the German units that were in the area. You know, if you read the G2 periodic reports for the 28th Division, for the 14th and the 13th and 15th and 16th, there's a whole laundry list of miscellaneous German units that were in this area, like Security Regiment 191 was in that area. They had been battling mauled in Normandy and were in the area on September 14th. And I think that unit was probably, I think it was, if I remember correctly, deactivated in October. But there was, Das Reich was also in that area, another unit that had been hit hard in Normandy, and in particular in the Kessfeld area, there was the 3rd Battalion of the Der Fuhrer Regiment, so was in the area. So those are just a few of the units that I saw in the G2 periodic reports. So there's also the 741st Unit Journal does document this episode, as well as the after action report. And the after action report also includes some statements written by various officers from the 741st about their activities during September. And one of them is about a 1.5-page typewritten statement from Joe Dew. And there's a good long paragraph in there about the action on September 14th. And he says in there that the penetration of the dragon's teeth occurred at around 0925. So also I found this map to corroborate the location where that breakthrough occurred. This map, this battle map, well worn, heavily soiled, and water damaged, was in the possession of the widow of a 741st officer. And when I visited her, she showed me the map, and I unfolded it, and I saw the red X. I don't know if you can see it there, Paul, but I'll put a little, if I click my arrow button here, it'll put a little white star.
Right, yep.
Yeah, the white star is exactly where the penetration was. So it's just a little bit off from the center of that red X. But this map, it's the same map we saw before, but this one has the defense overprint in red, and it shows the dragon teeth. They're not quite in the right spot. It's just approximately where they were. But anyhow, this corroborated the location that was on that overlay in the combat interview document that I found at NARA. So the next thing, now of course, I put the little star there where it actually was. The only way I was able to figure out where it actually was by going there, which we'll get to in a little bit. But before we go, this is a diagram of the particular type of dragon's teeth that were in that area. And these were all the early type built in 1938. So there was 4 of them that you had to take out to get through. The tallest one in the back was 1 meter high, and the lowest one was 40 centimeters. And I noted that the, of an M4, M4A1, the ground clearance of that was 43.5 centimeters. So it was, you had 3.5 centimeters clearance there. I mean, on paper that works, but I don't know if you would really want to try to drive right over that with that little clearance. So, or maybe you could drive up on it with one of the tracks of the tank and crush it, because it seems like it says in this document over in the German, I translated it into English, that it was meant to restrain a tank up to 20 metric tons. And, a Sherman was, 33 tons, US tons. So maybe you could have crushed it, or maybe they just used an AP shell to take it out. But he had to take out 4 of them, and I'm sure some of them, like that one that was a meter tall in the back, that required more than one shell to take that out. So again, to take out these 4 and to be on the frontal armor of that tank doing this without getting hit Joe Dew was definitely a guy who dared all dangers. There was a few guys in the 741st who were like that, and who were just fearless in many respects. So. But anyhow, that gives you an idea of what he had to do there to clear a gap in the Dragon's Teeth. He had to take out 4 teeth there. So I found this aerial photo at Nara as well, and I traced in red the edge of the Dragon's Teeth, so you can see it more clearly. But in this aerial photo from January of 45, I circled in red all the German concrete bunkers, so you can see what was on the other side of the teeth and the fire that was directed, much of it in the direction of Joe Dew and the guys from the 110th Infantry. And the blue arrow shows the attack route, or the general route that Company E was supposed to take. And I put a blue X on the spot where the breakthrough actually occurred, where the Dragon's Teeth were knocked down. Now, when I first saw this photo, I didn't know exactly where the breakthrough occurred, because if you look at it, it's really hard to see a break in the Dragon's Teeth. The width of a tank is maybe 3 meters or so. To try to spot a narrow gap like that with a photograph of this resolution is almost impossible. But knowing where it was now, when I looked at it, you can just barely see a little white line through there where maybe some snow had filled in the gap a little bit. It's really hard to tell. If you didn't know to look there, you wouldn't ever spot anything there. But anyhow, I thought this one illustrated better the location of the German defenses that they were against that day, and the infantry definitely would have never been able to take those if the tanks hadn't made it through there. So here is a Google Earth photograph of the same area, and again, Dragon's Teeth highlighted in red. Some water. So when I was looking at this Google Earth photo, I couldn't see the breakthrough area where it actually occurred. It's just too hard to see. But now that I know where it was, if I look at this, I can just barely see it. It's there. But I didn't mark it yet on this map here. But when I visited there 3 years ago, there's a little car park there. I circled that in yellow down there. That's where you park your car. And there's a hiking trail, a Westwall hiking trail, and that's where you start your trek along the Westwall. And there's little historical markers along the way explaining the Dragon's Teeth. And that graphic I showed earlier that showed the Dragon's Teeth and the dimensions and so forth, that was actually off of one of the signs that I found in that area. But as I hiked out from the car park out towards the area where I suspected the breakthrough was, based on the combat interview and that battle map that I found, I knew there was another gap in the Dragon's Teeth, and it's what I drew a little white box around it, because I could see that on Google Earth, and it's a huge gap. It's like 40 feet wide. What's that, maybe 12 meters or so? You could put 3, maybe 4 tanks through there abreast, and that was clear on the Google Earth image. So I walked out there, and I first stopped and looked at that and couldn't decide whether, was that done after the war to get farm machinery across from one area to the next? Or was it done by engineers during the war? I wasn't really sure either way, but I knew that the area I was looking for was at least 100 meters away from there. So I kept walking. And as I kept walking toward the area where I expected to find the gap, I found one right at the tip of that arrow there along the dragon teeth. So I had my tape measure with me, and I had Richard Honeycutt's book, or a few pages from it, on Sherman tanks, sort of the Bible of Sherman tanks. And I knew that on most variants or versions of the M4 and M4A1, the distance from the center of the track on the right and left was 83 inches. But that isn't the number I needed. That wasn't especially helpful to me. I needed to know the distance from the edge of the right track to the edge of the left track. And this drawing helped. I mean, it does show the 83 inches from center of track, but it shows that the distance from the outside of one track to the outside of the other was 99 inches. So I knew I was looking for a gap that was a little bit bigger than that. Not 1 or 2 inches, but enough that you could get through it. And when I measured that gap there, you had about 8 inches of clearance on either side. So it was a really narrow gap. And that's a picture of it, of the gap. And when I was looking at it, you could clearly see that there was 4 dragon's teeth down the center of that were missing. And I was measuring the lateral distance between the teeth on either side of this. And yeah, for sure, there was 4 teeth down the center of that's missing. And I noticed at the narrowest point, one of the teeth in there had a lot of scrape marks on it, which, I mean, there's a lot of things could cause that over the years, but it could have been from the, tracks of a tank hitting it. So, and I might add, at this point in the war, they weren't using extended end connectors on the track, so that would have made that would have made it a little too wide. So it was 99 inches without extended end connectors. That picture of ASP II crossing the bridge at Dümpelfeld, it had the extended end connectors on it at that point, but they didn't really have them here, at least not in any photos that I've ever seen. So anyhow, I could see that there was a row of dragon's teeth missing down the center here, and it was in exactly the right position based on the 2 maps that I had. And then I started to measure some of the lateral distance between teeth at different points along the line here, and I realized that the lateral distance between the teeth varied. And in most spots along there, if you took out 4 teeth, you would not have a gap wide enough to put a tank through it. So this spot was very well chosen, that it was wide enough to get a tank through it. So here's a picture I took from the other side of it, looking through the gap. And there's a historical marker there, and it's got that graphic on it of the dragon's teeth. And this would have been in, roughly the same position where Joe Dew's tank was when he took out the 4 dragon's teeth down the center of that gap there. And I was looking at that marker, and I thought, wow, there ought to be a picture of Joe Dew on that thing along with his gunner, Albert Wallace there. But I'm sure the people that put that marker had no idea what happened there on September 14th. So anyone who's, interested in more about Joe Dew, there's I think I showed this in my last presentation, but his daughter wrote a biography of.
Yeah, I remember you saying. Yeah.
So Elaine did that, and it's well written. She's, if I remember correctly, she's a retired English teacher. So it's a book worth owning, and like I said, well written. So, and I think it's still on Amazon. It was print on demand, so you can still get it. So
excellent.
Anyhow, enough about Joe Dew, and we'll move on to this guy, Ed Sledge.
Yeah.
So get some more water here. So there's a picture of Ed taken at Fort Dix in September of '43, not long before they went overseas. And he, at that time, was leader of the 1st Platoon of Company A. And there's a picture of him next to it receiving the Silver Star on July 14th from General Robertson. And there's the letter is a email letter that he wrote home on June 15th, the day after that award presentation. And he mentions the Silver Star in that letter to his mother. And he says he's going to send home the medal in the mail to her. And he, in all of his letters to her, he always refers to her as Mother Dear. One word. I've never seen it written as one word like that, but it's characteristic of him. And his brother used the same word when talking about their mother. So this is dated September.
I'll have to ask Henry about it. Yeah, I'll have a chat with him. Yeah.
Yeah, both of them referred to their mother as Mother Dear, one word, and their dad was always Pop or Pops. So I've heard Pop or Pops a lot. That's very common, but I've never seen Mother Dear as one word. But anyhow, that above the letter is, all of Ed's ribbons. He had a Silver Star for Omaha Beach. The Bronze Star was for an action on December 15th, the day before the Bulge started. Company A was part of the 2nd Division's attack on the Wallerscheid Road Junction, which was part of a larger 5th Corps offensive to seize the Roar River dams, which got called off because the Bulge started. But and Ed had been wounded 3 times, so he had 2 oak leaf clusters on his Purple Heart, and he had 5 bronze battle stars, and of course the arrowhead for Omaha Beach. And above his name there on the slide, he had a Presidential Unit Citation with oak leaf cluster. The 2 awards, one was Omaha Beach and the other was Krinkelt Rocherath for that award. But that photograph of him in his tanker jacket with the helmet on receiving the Silver Star, he was actually wounded on July 11th on Hill 192. It was a particularly hard day for his company. He had a number of his men were killed that day, including his platoon sergeant, Tommy Fair. And I mean, it was a horrific death, burning to death in their tanks. And that whole story is in my book of what happened that day. But Ed got hit in the back of the neck. And aside from lacerating his neck, it tore up his helmet in the back. And I think the photographer's name was Josiah Carpenter, but he took that picture on the 14th because Ed was in the hospital then. And they pulled him out of the hospital to receive the medal. And that's when the photo was taken. And he mentions being in the hospital on June 15th in that letter there. And he talks about, they had plenty of food there and much more than they were getting on the front line. And as I dug into this, I don't think I put this in my book, but the hospital was actually within the 2nd Division. It was run by the 2nd Medical Battalion. The 2nd Medical Battalion had 4 companies. There was A, B, and C, which were the collecting companies, and they took casualties from the battalion aid stations and they funneled them back to the clearing company, which I think was Company D. And then Company D would funnel the patients to field hospitals and evac hospitals. And apparently at the clearing company, they had set up sort of an inpatient facility there where they could keep guys for short term. So they got Ed sutured up and they kept him there for a few days under observation. And I think the advantage in doing that is if guys that, they knew could return to duty in a few days, if you kept them within the division and out of the hospital system, you could return them back to their units easily. Whereas if you turn them over to the hospital system and they came out of there, they went back into the replacement pool and they may or may not get back to their units. So because Ed was kept at the clearing company in their little hospital, he was able to come back to Company A, and I'm sure the personnel officer in the 741st knew he was there, so they didn't backfill his position. So he went back to 1st Platoon on July 17th. So the next slide is some particulars on Ed, and he was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1920, and he was a 1941 graduate of the Citadel, which is sort of the West Point of the South. And there's a picture of him in his cadet uniform there. And there's a picture of he and his brother taken after the war, colorized black and white photo. And the letter in the photo is actually from his brother. It was written on July 14th, the same day that picture of Ed was taken, receiving the Silver Star, except Eugene, or Gene as he signs his letters here, I think on July 14th, he would have been in the Pacific on, what was that island where they staged for Peleliu, Pavuvu?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where he was when he wrote that letter to his brother. So in the letter, he does reference, their mutual friend, Sid Phillips, who was in the HBO series. And his name, he's mentioned in the first sentence there. And Um, Gene refers to his brother as Slag, S-L-A-G. I never asked anybody in Ed's family what Slag meant or where that name came from, but where I got this letter from, and the one in the previous slide, was from Ed's daughter. Ed had two kids after the war, or three kids, excuse me, two sons and a daughter. And the daughter, she scanned all the letters that he wrote home during the war, and she gave me copies of them. And there were some letters from Gene in there as well that came along with it. And there was maybe only 2 or 3 letters from Gene, but all the rest were Ed's letters home. So, to my knowledge, that's the letters that he wrote home are the only his writing where he talks about any wartime experiences. He never wrote a memoir after the war like his brother, or wrote really anything about his wartime experiences. So his daughter scanning all the wartime letters was definitely helpful. He certainly wasn't able to talk about combat operations in the letters, but the things he did talk about were interesting, and I was able to use a number of quotes from his letters in the book. So anyhow, Ed was commissioned in 42, and he joined the 741st in April of 42 and first went to Company B. And he spent, I don't remember how much time he spent there, but he ended up over in Headquarters Company before finally landing in Company A and become leader of 1st Platoon. And he was a platoon leader up until August 7th of 44 in Normandy, when he became CO of Company D. And so he was with the light tanks. From October 7th to October 16th, he commanded the light tank company. And on the 16th of October is when he went back to Company A as the CO. Captain Thomas, who had been the CO of Company A, moved up to battalion headquarters. That created a vacancy in the CO's spot in Company A, and Ed moved over to take over there. And prior to that, in September, he had been promoted to captain. So he remained with Company A up until the day he was wounded on March 7th, 45, and then he was hospitalized. And he came back to Company A on May 9th. And he remained with Company A until July 28th of 45, when a lot of guys that were high pointers or whatever were, heading back to the States and joining other units to go back home. And Ed certainly had enough points for discharge, so he left the 741st and went over the 701st Tank Battalion, which was with the 8th Armored Division at that time, and he joined them on July 28th. And then I found some reference where he was with the 98th Replacement Battalion, or Reinforcement Battalion, as it was called at that time, on September 20th. And I know he ended up at Fort Knox by January of 46. He was there, and he was in the States before that because he got married in December. And he was discharged in March of 46. And I know he made major before he got out, so I assume maybe that happened in the first quarter of 46. I don't have a data rank for when he made major. But anyhow, there's the Silver Star for June 6th and the Bronze Star for December 15th, I already mentioned. And there's the 3 times he was wounded, the July 11th episode where he got hit in the back of the neck and returned to duty on the 17th. And then he got wounded again on August 4th, but remained on duty. And that incident, or that episode, or that injury didn't show up in the company morning reports until November, if I remember correctly. That's where I picked it up. Wow. He had been wounded slightly on August 4th. His tank was knocked out that day, and he managed to get out of that alive. There was 2 tanks from Company A that were involved in that incident. One of them was had one crew member who was killed, supposedly bayoneted in the back after he bailed out. But I think all of Ed's crew made it out of there. But in the scramble to get out of the tank, he got hurt and he lost his wireframe glasses. And he was, in one of the letters where he was talking about this, he was lamenting the fact that he had lost his glasses trying to get out of that knocked out tank. But apparently he got another pair because he stayed on with the company and was there till March 7th. Now, if you read the morning reports, he came back to the battalion on May 7th, but he didn't become commander of Company A again until May 9th. So the reason I point those dates out is to earn his 5th battle star for the Central European campaign. That the time frame for that battle star was between, I think it was March 22nd and May 8th. And so returning to duty with the 741st, he made it by 1 day to earn the fifth battle star. So I don't know if he ever wore it, but he would have been entitled to it by 1 day. So, and I'm sure if he was entitled to it, he probably wore it.
And the number of battle stars he got and the fact he was wounded, it is actually a testament to the fact that the American tanks were actually reasonably survivable. You know, I mean, we have this idea that, you know, no tanker made it all the way through the war. They were burning up all the time. But, you know, as can be proven, it's a tough life. But, you know, you could go all the way through. You defy the odds.
I never met a 741st vet who ever referred to their tank as a death trap or anything like that. You know, they were certainly willing to acknowledge its weaknesses.
Yeah.
And they also understood its strengths. And they did everything they could to play to their strengths. And they also understood the strengths and weaknesses of the enemy armor. So again, played to their strength and to the enemy's weaknesses when they faced enemy armor on those rare occasions when that happened. But anyhow, again, I never met anybody who considered their tank a piece of junk or that it was a death trap.
Well, we have that bloody Belton Cooper book to blame for that. A lot of that, don't we? That came out in the 90s.
If you look at some of the casualty figures or loss figures in the 3rd Armored Division, it was exponentially higher than any other unit. I mean, even if you take it on a percentage basis, so you could compare a tank division to a tank battalion or sort of compare them, it's still really high in the 3rd AD. So they maybe really were death traps in that unit, but not in the 741st and most other tank battalions that I'm familiar with, especially the ones that were in the infantry support role. But and even in the 2nd Armored Division, I was comparing because both the 3rd and the 2nd were both heavy armored divisions, and the 2nd Armored had much lower casualties than 3rd Armored. But anyhow, that's a story. I think you've probably had other people on that have discussed 3rd Armored and the loss rate there. But
yeah, I mean, it varies. I mean, someone's mentioning the Sherwood Rangers and the British Army having only 2 officers made it all the way through. It depends what theatre you're in. It depends what actions you're in. It depends how your unit is being deployed. But yeah, no, it is. It does depend. But yeah, brilliant presentation, by the way.
Here's one other Ed Sledge story. I think I showed this slide last time.
You did.
Kind of where it ended, but this is the battalion command post in Rocherath. What's left of it? About half of the house, the barn section, most of it was torn down in 2011, and they did keep a little part of it, which is where the automobile garage is there, and you can just see in the photograph the outline of the old barn door right above the garage door there. So a little bit of the old barn is there, but anyhow, the part that's fully intact is the residential part of the house, and there's a basement underneath that. And the command post was in the basement on the 1st floor, and on the 2nd floor they had stuff on all floors of this building. And I think last week I was talking about the 2 tanks, the 2 deadline tanks that were up at that bend road of Hall and Niedrich and their actions. And Colonel Skaggs was in this building. To give you an idea of the situation as it was on the 18th of December. So Colonel Skaggs is in this building, and his counterpart, Arnold Jorgensen, the battalion commander on the SS Panzer Regiment 12 side of this, his CP was 350 meters away from this. So the 2 opposing battalion commanders are that close to each other. So it was a confusing and desperate situation there that they were in. And there's a story amongst Company A vets that's just an Ed Sledge story that was legendary. The first guy that told it to me was a Company A vet named Val Pfister. And apparently there was a meeting. I don't know if it was a company commander's meeting, but it occurred on the 18th of December. Or maybe it was just a meeting in the command post between Skaggs and Sledge. But during this meeting, they were discussing the situation and, with the enemy in that close proximity. I don't know exactly what Skaggs said, but he was discussing, the situation that they faced, and that, not that surrender was an option, but they could be forced into that situation. And he made the mistake of using that word in front of Ed Sledge, surrender. And as soon as Ed heard that word, he just exploded and told him that, you can have companies B and C, but you're not getting company A. And he stormed out of the meeting and and left. And he didn't put it as politely as I just did there, but that story of Sledge going off on Colonel Skaggs was legendary in Company A. And I met one guy from headquarters company. He wasn't a witness to it, but he was aware that that altercation had happened. And it's tied to another incident, or maybe it's tied to another incident that a guy from Company C told me about. One of the crew members of the Company C assault gun went into number 100 Rocherath here. And, at this point in the battle, the battalion commander is down the basement. He had to take a message or do something. I can't remember what it was, but his name was Ralph Woodward. And he went down the basement of this building, and he found Colonel Skaggs down there on the floor, in tears. He had suffered a nervous breakdown in the basement of this thing. And Ralph said to me, he said, we're in a real dire situation there. And to see your battalion commander having fallen apart on the floor of this base, of this cellar, was not exactly confidence building. And he said it really shook him up. And he got out of there. And Skaggs did manage to pull it together. He was never relieved of command. And he just had a momentary breakdown in that situation, in the basement there. And I don't know whether that was before or after Ed Sledge blew up on him, but I remember asking some guys from Company A about it, and Val Pfister had heard that there had been a breakdown, that the battalion commander had suffered a breakdown, and one guy from headquarters company also corroborated that. And the reaction I got was, amongst everybody that knew about it, the reaction was, it was the same. And it was, that kind of thing can happen to anybody at any time. And he said, Val told me, he said, it could have happened to me at any time. He said, they didn't think ill of him for having that, because a lot of guys, it was so bad they had to be evacuated. Some guys could pull it together and soldier on. And that's apparently what Colonel Skaggs did. So they didn't really think any of the less of him for having done that. But the fact that he got a Silver Star for Krinkelt, that did raise a couple of eyebrows for his performance there in the Twin Villages. But nevertheless, and knowing what I know about General Robertson, if Skaggs hadn't been fit for command, Robertson would not have hesitated to relieve him. And because he certainly did relieve other people. He reminds me a little bit of Lightning Joe Collins, who would relieve people at the drop of a hat if he didn't think they were up to the job. There was no second chances. And General Robertson was much the same. So he did think rather well of Colonel Skaggs. And I never really met anybody in the 741st who really disparaged the guy. I never heard a lot of negative comments about him, or really any at all. Then again, I never heard anybody in the 741st rave about him and go on and on about him like some guys did about Ed Sledge. He was really well liked, Ed was, and really revered by some of his men. I never heard that degree of esteem placed around Colonel Skaggs by anybody in the 741st, but he was certainly a competent officer and got the job done, and General Robertson liked him, which was saying something. So I think that's it for Ed Sledge. But a little note here about a future project. When my book first rolled off the presses, I think it was early September, there were some advanced reader copies went out, and one of them went to Phil Nordyke. I don't know if you're familiar with that name.
I know Phil. Yeah. Yeah.
So Phil got it and was reading it. And after he read it, he made a comment to me. He said, why didn't you do a photographic history of the 741st? Because, the book is a 6x9 format, which is, this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it isn't the most ideal format from photographs, because it works well for, portraits of people. Those come out well enough. But pictures taken in the field by Signal Corps cameraman or the soldiers themselves, they have to be reproduced rather small in that 6x9 format. So we said, why don't you do a photographic history? Because Phil had done the same thing. He did this thing, a larger format like this, soft
Yep,
cover.
I got that one. Yep, yeah.
He said, why don't you do something like that, a thin volume, and then put all the photos in there so you can show them in larger format. And I said, I never thought of doing that. That'd be a good idea. So I think maybe next year I'm going to start that project. And there's also a lot of photographs that I didn't have room for in this book that I could put in there. And there's a color plate there that I have on the screen right now of a tank dozer that was knocked out in Krinkelt Rocherath. It was Tom Carlson's dozer. And there's an illustrator in Spain who did this illustration for me, Philippe. And, I felt bad. I mean, he did this nice illustration for me. And in the book, it's reproduced very small and in black and white. So if I do the photo history, I could reproduce that much larger and in color. And I think I might have Philippe tweak that light Ode green in that picture. There's a little too faded out. It needs to be a little bit darker than that. But so I'll have him tweak that and maybe create, a few more. One of them that I'll have him do is Ed Sledge's D-Day tank, which that's the only known photograph of it right there. I think that was taken on June 9th on Omaha, and the name painted on the side of it was Alabama II. And it was an M4A175. And you can see the exhaust stack is laying down on the ground behind the tank there. So I think I'll have Philippe maybe create a profile of that one and maybe do ASP II and maybe a couple German tanks as well. And I can put that in there. So,
well, you've whet all our appetites for that now. Yeah, I mean, the sidebars just got excited. They were excited enough about the first book. Now there's a pictorial book as well in the potential pipeline. They're really excited now.
Of all the photographs I've seen of 741st Armor, a number of them, the tanks had nicknames painted on the side of them. But only 2 tanks that I'm familiar with ever had artwork painted on the side. And Ed's tank, his Omaha Beast tank, is one of them. In addition to Alabama II, there's some artwork painted there. And I was looking at the photograph, and it has to do with Alabama. And I think I figured out what the illustration is there. I'll have to draw it up in Adobe Illustrator and give it to Philippe. I won't make him try to interpret what's in that photo. It's a very grainy photo. It's I don't know if I mentioned it. That's a still capture from motion picture film. So that's why it's of such poor quality. But anyhow, so I'll create that. And I do know the registration number of that tank, so I can add that. I don't know what the tactical number was that would have been painted on the back of it. But anyhow, so again, there's the book. And I think I mentioned last time, through the end of the year, I have some bonus content available. One is my English translation, a few chapters from this book. It's it's an ebook, so it's strictly electronic. It's not something you can print out, but I'll send it to you, and you can read it on your computer.
Brilliant.
And there's some maps and some other material there.
And the links are in the description below, of course, folks. And there's Bill's website. That's also in the description below. So we had a question that I was going to ask in a different way, but it's coming from viewers, so I'll put it in from Grant instead. At this moment in time, meaning kind of the end of the war, the March 45, what does Bill think the levels of morale at the front line were? Because I was going to ask you whether in your research materials, whether the diaries start getting thinner when you get into 1945, because I've spoken to lots of historians who say that the guys that have been in the line since D-Day, they're exhausted, they're fed up, they want the war to end, and the entries in the war diaries get more brief. The diary entries get. Did you find that with the 741st that there was sort of a drop off in information as you got towards the end of the war?
In terms of what you find in the official operational records of the 741st, it was about the same. It actually improved as the war went on, more detail. In unit journals and in after action reports, I didn't really see a drop off in that. So and Ed Sledge's letters that I read, starting in Normandy all the way through, and it's more or less the same tone all the way through. And he's certainly not expressing to his parents how bad things are. He certainly didn't want to upset his mother by telling her what was really going on, especially in that letter of July 15th, to tell her what had really just happened to him a few days before and what had happened to some of his men that day. The photograph of him receiving the Silver Star, he did send that home to his mother or his parents. And if you look at the photo, you can see he's really been through the ringer. He does not look good in the photograph. He also sent home a picture of the helmet that was battle damaged. And I've never seen that photo, but in July of 44, Hal Boyle of the Associated Press saw the photo of the helmet, and he wrote an article about Ed Sledge and that helmet. And it appeared in newspapers across the United States. I've read the article in a number of papers, but there's no picture of the helmet. And I never asked his daughter, who gave me the picture of the Silver Star presentation, if she had a picture of that battle damaged helmet. So I don't know if he retained the helmet or whether he threw it out and got a new one. But I seem to recall that his son or grandson told me that his tanker jacket was still around and they belonged to somebody in Eugene's family. So maybe Henry has that. I'm not sure. But incidentally, Ed's son, he had two sons. One of them was named Ed, so that's Ed the Third. I think he was also an Army officer and was in armor, I think. His son, Ed the Fourth, was definitely an armor officer, and he was a 1995 West Point graduate. And he did not make the Army a career. He's an attorney with a law firm in Mobile today. But so both.
I'm fairly sure I was chatting to Henry at We Have Ways 2 years ago, and he was saying that within the family, the Marine connection is less prominent than, as you say, the armor connection. There are more Sledges that played in tanks than ran up beaches in the Pacific. It's just that obviously the power of Sledge's book is that's what we see the name Sledge and we immediately think Marine. Well, you've done a great job in kind of correcting that a bit and talking about Ed. So so fantastic stuff. So yeah, brilliant.
Here's a slide I put on here if we got a little extra time. In 1943, the 741st was in a Hollywood film, Five Graves to Cairo. They were doing in desert training. The battalion was at Camp Young in California, and Company B loaned one platoon to Paramount Pictures, which went over to Arizona to make the movie. And when the film starts, it takes place, it's 8th Army in North Africa. And it starts with this M3 trundling across the sand with the tank commander hanging dead in the turret. And that was an M3 from one of the platoons of Company B. And in another shot, you can see all the tanks in the platoon going across the desert there. They're supposed to be British tanks. But so that was little 741st Battalion trivia.
I didn't know that was a 741st. That's I have to go and look at that one again. I know that one was one of those weird things where the censors were more worried about Ann Baxter's tight top than they were War Dead or something. And the ridiculous thing of 1943 is her blouse too tight for the American public.
When I was watching the movie, there's some light tanks in that movie as well, but the 741st didn't have light tanks at that time, so I don't know what unit those came from. But
interesting.
Anyhow.
Willie said that he seems to remember Henry mentioning the tanker's jacket in John McManus and Kevin Himmel's podcast last week. So I'll have to ask Henry and Kevin and John. John's in Normandy, I think. I haven't seen him yet. Yeah, how what happened to it, and if Willie is right there. So well, brilliant stuff, Bill. I mean, you know what to do, folks. Go and get the book pre-ordered, so that you can encourage Bill to get the photo book done, because the thing is, folks, as we always say, it's not just the book, it's the 20 years, 30 years, 40 years Bill has put into this, and it's our duty to support people like Bill by going out there and buying the book and making the work all worthwhile. So brilliant stuff, Bill. I hope sales go through the roof for you, and I hope you do the pictorial book and come back and talk about that. Your research is just absolutely incredible, something to be admired. I've had a few fantastic historians there, but you're in that top caliber in terms of the analysis you do. So kudos to you, sir.
Yeah, well, maybe next time another subject we could talk about Charles McDonald and do something on him and his trace the route that he describes in his book.
That'd be good. Yeah, and I'm just a tribute to how, I mean, people talk about Ambrose's involvement in pushing the story of World War II, but a generation earlier, I suppose, or a few years earlier, MacDonald did so much, particularly to get the Battle of the Bulge known.
He was
him and John Eisenhower, Bitter Woods and things. That was it. So anyway, Bill, we'll talk again another time. So
thanks, Paul.
I'm back again tomorrow, folks, where Greg Way is joining us for our first in our war crimes series this week. We're looking at the trial of student in Crete for the accused of murdering British soldiers. So we'll do that tomorrow. As always, click like and subscribe. I will see you all again the next time. Cheers. Bye.